Good day, Mr. Chairman, directors, fellow shareholders. It's hard to speak to stony faces. However, I hope you are paying close attention to a shareholder who represents the concerns of 20%, around 20% of your shareholders. Last year, 1 in 5 of your shareholders voted for the Follow This climate resolution to ask you to align your targets with the Paris Climate Agreement. And in a shareholder democracy, 20%, in a shareholder democracy where ordinarily 99% votes with management, 20% is a clear shareholder rebellion. These shareholders understand mitigating climate risk as key to their fiduciary duty. They see emissions, carbon-based emissions, as a threat to the global economy and, in extension, as a threat to their assets. Mr. Sawan, it's your job to address the concerns, to respond to the concerns of your shareholders. They are your owners. But what did you give them in March? The opposite. They asked you to align your targets with the Paris Climate Agreement. You gave them the opposite. You not only weakened your 2030 target, you completely scrapped your 2035 target, and on top of that, Shell declared that in the rest of this decade, they will not further reduce emissions. Dear shareholders, get the load of this. The world has pledged to almost halve emissions by 2030 to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement to stop global warming. And your company has no plans to further reduce emissions this decade. This is really problematic. Your board wants to continue with the business model of turning hydrocarbons into petrodollars. They just don't want to think about anything else. This business model they've mastered in the last decades of their career very successfully, and therefore they are in the executive suites and on this stage. They simply don't want to step out of their comfort zone because they don't know how to make profits with clean energy, and they don't want to explore new business models. And dear shareholders, we have to ask ourselves the question, are we not going to solve this problem because we're dealing with boards of oil majors who don't know how to make profits from clean energy and who don't want to explore new business models? Are we going to let climate change spiral out of control because these boards don't want to get outside their comfort zones? That's an outcome that I and many others, including many of your shareholders, do not want to entertain. And dear shareholders, you have to realize that you have to come out of your comfort zone. Your board will only change course if you vote for change. And that's what you can do today, by voting for Resolution 23. A resolution filed by Follow This and 27 of your peers. Together, these 27, they include Amundi, AXA, large investors here in the UK, Brunel, Nest. Together, they represent 4 trillion. That's roughly 20 times the market capitalization of Shell. And let me remind you, this 20% of Shell is more than your largest shareholders, State Street, Vanguard, BlackRock, and Norges combined. You have to respond to them. So today we will know which shareholders are the true stewards of the global economy and which shareholders, how many shareholders, enable this board and the boards of the other oil majors to continue causing climate breakdown. And we'd like to thank the investors who supported our resolution today, specifically the 27 investors who co-filed this resolution, and we hope other investors will follow their example, follow their leadership, because this board will only change if you vote for change. I'd like to end with one simple question for the chair here. For clarity, dear shareholders, you've heard Shell talking about being Paris-aligned, about believing to be Paris-aligned. Like the tobacco industry believed tobacco didn't cause cancer, like the oil industry in the past believed that climate change was not real. So, Mr. Chairman, can you please explain to your shareholders how a company that has no plans to reduce emissions this decade can be Paris-aligned? Can you explain it without using the word believe?
You finished? Sorry, I wasn't.
Yeah, this is my question. Please explain to your shareholders, without using the word believe,
well,
that you're Paris-aligned without reducing emissions.
I'd like to now ask the CEO to respond before we invite any questions or comments. I just wondered is there anything more you want to say before I do that?
I'm okay.
You're finished. Okay.
I'm eager to hear your answer.
Okay. Well, I might add to Will's answer in a moment. Look, and by the way, I apologise if we're a bit stony-faced. You know, AGMs can be a bit serious. Well, I'll try and smile a bit more and well spoken. But Will.
Thank you, Sir Andrew. Shareholders, thank you again for the support that you have continued to show management and the board. Let me maybe just start with a couple of key points. Firstly, Shell is very much aligned with achieving a net zero 2050 outcome and trying to continue to drive down the trajectory of the Paris Agreement. To be more specific, and as we have indicated in our energy transition report, we are using the most ambitious scenarios under the IPCC 6th assessment report that indicate that as a company we continue to make good progress. The resolution that has been put forward by Follow This is bad on multiple fronts. Firstly, it's bad for the environment. One of the key elements that is agreed by many is that LNG has a critical role in playing in the energy transition to be able to establish coal to gas switching. By doing that, that has actually been one of the biggest elements that has contributed to a significant reduction in emissions in the US and in places like here in the UK, and that is going to be critical for the reduction in emissions, in particular in Asia, in countries like India and China. Secondly, the resolution as proposed is bad for our customers. Many of those customers you heard from just here in the video, customers who depend on us to provide them the energy of today while working with them to establish low carbon solutions of tomorrow. And that's what we are doing. Though those customers want to be able to ensure that they can actually transform their energy demand to lower carbon energy. It doesn't happen overnight, even with the best intent. They also want to assure themselves that they can get affordable energy, both elements of which we are working with them on. If we were to divorce ourselves from supplying our customers the energy of today, we are at risk of not being there to support them on their energy of tomorrow. Thirdly, this is bad for you as our shareholders. Essentially, what the opposing resolution is proposing is for us to hand over those businesses to our competitors. At the end of the day, this is about transforming energy demand. And once that energy demand is transformed, the supply will follow. And by simply shifting that supply obligation away from Shell, we will be shifting businesses over to our competitors. And finally, this is bad governance. Your board, your management team has evaluated the multiple different considerations, and we have tried through the energy transition strategy, which we presented in March of this year, to present a holistic picture of how we can deliver more value with less emissions. On the back of that, and on the back of what I've just described, your board, your management team strongly recommend that you reject the resolution as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
So thank you. Let me remind the audience of the question. The question was, how can a company that has no plans to reduce emissions this decade be Paris-aligned? without using the word believe. I didn't hear an answer to that question, and I know why. Because you're an engineer, Mr. Sawan. You know that we can't base strategy on beliefs. We have to base it on facts and science. And you know science is clear. The world has to reduce emissions almost by half this decade. Shell is not willing to do it. So please be honest to your shareholders and just say, I don't believe in Paris. Because by continuing to say we believe we are aligned with Paris, you're misleading your shareholders.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to move on, but we do believe in Paris. And I'm sorry I used that word.
Please use another word than believe. We
Well,
need science and facts.
Well, now hold on. I mean, all right, we commit to Paris if you prefer to argue about a particular verb. And that's why we have a 2050 net zero target. And I just remind you, we have an ambition to reduce our sale of oil products, which is new this time, between 15 and 20% by 2030. And we hold that our increased production of LNG and continued production of LNG will allow the displacement of coal. We won't get credit for that reduction, but we believe in the overall system we are contributing to the aims of the Paris Agreement. I'd also point out that there's an awful lot of what we do are in the harder to abate sectors, where many of the changes will come in the next decade and the decades to follow rather than this decade. So we think, I'm trying to avoid not saying belief, that we are Paris compliant. There is no standard to determine Paris compliant, and as Will explained, we look at a number of scenarios, including the own IPCs, as they relate to our sectors, in order to make the judgment if whether or not we're on track to get to net zero by 2050.
Hello, my name is Tarek Buhush, and I work for Follow This. I wanted to say that in your recent update of your energy transition strategy, you scrapped your 2035 target. You took this decision 1 year before this target entered your 10-year strategic planning period. The concomitance of these two events is unfortunate, to say the least. It means you could also scrap your 2050 target 11 years before the deadline, the exact same way you decided to scrap the 2035 target this year. So my question is, can you reassure us that Shell will not scrap your 2050 target, net zero target, between now and 2039?
Okay. Look, first of all, maybe just comment on the 2035 target. The reason we chose to remove this primarily was because we were looking forward to certain developments that would allow us to be able to properly account for our customers' lower Scope 1 and 2 emissions and count them as Scope 3 emissions reductions for us and therefore in net carbon intensity. We've been pushing quite hard, you heard me talk briefly about this earlier, about having better processes for carbon accounting and things that are agreed, possibly at the COPs, that allowed more transparency in the way that we could achieve credits for our customers' foregone Scope 1 and 2 emissions using our products and using our hopefully lower carbon products in order to us to meet what it was quite a demanding target for 2035. And we've just been somewhat disappointed in the progress in the developing of this accounting process. And the things are very complex. It's very hard to see specifically that far ahead and know with certain certainty when we're so dependent for Scope 3 targets on the attitudes of customers, on regulators and governments. But we'll look again at 2035 or somewhere between 2030 and 2035 when we do the next refresh of our energy transition strategy in 2027. Right now we are absolutely committed to 2050. We develop everything from that and we use the scenarios to make sure we're on track to get there. And that's the planning basis we have for now. I'm not sure I want to answer your question in exactly the way you've asked it, but this management team and this board, seeing what we can see going forward, believes that 2050 is an important trajectory for us to plan Shell against. Okay, next question.
Excuse me. I'm afraid I didn't hear firm answer to my question. You know, the 15 years to come might face a scrapping of your 2050 target. And that was a long answer, but I want to remind my question for those who...
I think I've said all I want to say on this subject. I mean,
okay.
We're driving hard to get to net zero by 2050 now. It's shaping what the board does. It's shaping what management will do. And maybe going back to what Will said, I mean, look at our track record. Look at all the things that Will mentioned in our cuts in methane emissions and flaring, and the cuts in our own emissions. Our commitment our ambition to get to 15 to 20% less oil products. We're doing a number of things which we think add up to, in the fullness of time, the right trajectory to get to 2050.
And your track record is the scrapping of an interesting target the year before it enters your strategic planning period. I'm afraid this is not reassuring, and it leaves the 2050 net zero target empty. So we should focus on meaningful medium-term targets.
We see things with a slightly different emphasis. We believe that too much of the world right now is arguing about who's got the better target, and more should be about who's delivering most against the targets. And I think Shell shapes up very well. Thank you.